March 1922. Hinterkaifeck sat stranded on a wind-scoured Bavarian ridge, a single homestead miles from the nearest cluster of cottages. 6 members of one family kept a fragile routine there. The shadow of the Great War still lay over the countryside. Returning soldiers, economic hunger, brittle tempers, and whispered accusations made small communities twitchy and suspicious. The farm's rhythms were rigid and mundane, milking at dawn, feeding cattle in the loft above the living room, chopping wood for the cast-iron stove. The widow and her daughter ran the household with the help of a hired housekeeper to steady the workload. Those routines also left them exposed, a tiny human hub in a cold, indifferent landscape. The house was isolated by forest and slope. Snow could trap it for days, and the single track to town encouraged secrets. Early warnings crept in like frost. Neighbors later pointed to odd footprints in fresh snow, tracks that led from the woods to the barn, stopped at thresholds, and did not return. There were whispers of footsteps in the attic when no one should have been there, doors found unlocked, and keys misplaced. The family felt watched. At the time, these details were treated as petty mysteries, but each small, sinister sign, prints that did not make sense, noises above the ceiling, the uneasy look in the daughter's eyes, gnawed at the boundary between normal life and something predatory closing in. Those precise, unnerving details set the stage and tightened the suspense, making the farm feel exposed and imminently vulnerable. Footprints appeared like a slow promise of violence. Boot prints in fresh snow wound from the dark edge of the beechwood to the barn, then stopped as if the earth itself had swallowed the intruder. Neighbors noted the singular nature of the tracks, heavier than a farmhand's tread, oddly measured, sometimes doubling back before halting at thresholds, and talk in the valley tightened into a low, fearful hum. Inside the house, small, uncanny things multiplied. A milk pail left on the stove was found emptied and rinsed, as if some invisible servant had worked through the night. The barn's mangers held feed even though none of the family had done it. Someone had entered the outbuildings and tended the animals with a deliberate, invasive care that felt like a practiced ritual. Doors bolted at dusk were later discovered unlatched, a key misplaced, then found in a different drawer. The maid's bedside rug was tugged. The widow's shawl hung slightly off kilter, the daughter's boots arranged as if ready for leaving. Above them, the loft became a listening post. Footsteps were heard in the attic where no one slept. A soft scraping hinted that someone studied the family from the darkness between the rafters. Each small transgression ate away at the household's composure, turning ordinary routines into exposed vulnerabilities. The hired girl complained of being watched while she milked. The widow caught sight of a shape between trees at dawn, a hulking silhouette that dissolved when she called out. Neighbors began to mark days. On Thursday, the prints reappeared. On Friday, a lantern moved near the garden. On Saturday, the cows were let in earlier than usual. Gossip hardened into a compact chronology, not rumor, but a sequence. And with every recorded incident, the orbit of danger narrowed, drawing tighter around the homestead. Suspicion moved beyond petty unease into active dread. The family spoke of a presence that learned their habits, calibrated its intrusions, rehearsed them. The normal cadence of chores became a checklist against menace, and the sense of being watched shifted from theory to near certainty, like a loaded trigger set to go off at the next dawn. When the household failed to appear at the market and no smoke rose from the chimney, neighbors pushed through frozen yards and a grotesque silence greeted them. What they found stopped conversation and set a rumor mill in motion that never stopped. The attic door was bolted from the inside, and the loft ladder lay askew. Inside, every ordinary object felt like a witness. Bedclothes stained in a dark, congealed bloom. Blood spattered along the beams like splintered rust. A child's face frozen and turned to the ceiling. A woman collapsed where she had fallen with a shawl still clutched in a rigid fist. Boots and tools lay as if interrupted mid-task. A table set for a simple supper bore a dark smear, like a bloody signature. Investigators arrived with measured boots and notebooks and pens, but their tools were crude. A coroner's scalpel, a magnifying glass, witness statements and memory. No modern chemistry and no forensic science to produce a clear, scientific truth. Tracks in the snow outside contradicted the scene inside. A single set of wood-soled prints leading to the barn, then vanishing into the dark. While inside there were scuffs of multiple sizes and a child's shoe dragged as if by force. Keys were found where no one remembered putting them. A pocket watch was missing, though a cigarette case sat untouched. Rumors hardened into suspects. A resentful neighbor who had argued over fences and was seen near the path. A returned soldier with a jagged temper and wartime scars who had been refused work. A hired hand dismissed weeks earlier who vowed vengeance. And a whisper of a stranger seen leaving town the night before. Each potential motive, debt, jealousy, revenge, deranged cruelty, fit like a shard of glass into the open wound of the case. Police moved too slowly in some places and too eagerly in others, trampling footprints, allowing curious men to move bodies, listening to gossip as if it were testimony. Conflicting confessions and denials flooded the inquiry. Alibis clashed, and a local magistrate leaned toward the comfortable certainty of a single guilty party, while evidence stubbornly suggested either a ritualized, calculated assault or a deranged loner who knew the family's every step. The more questions officials raised, the more the valley answered with accusation. That multiplying confusion pushed the hunt toward a climax of suspicion, vigilante rage, and investigative collapse. The investigation hit a fever pitch when new, contradictory evidence forced officials to abandon tidy narratives and reckon with a darker, more complex geometry of crime. A neighbor who had first described a lone silhouette at dawn later insisted he had seen two figures moving near the beechwood. Another villager swore he saw only a lantern bobbing, no bodies at all. What once looked like a single, solemn wood-soled trail fragmented into a tangle of impressions. Smaller scuffs overlapped larger heels, a faint child's tread bisected a boot print, and a heel mark doubled back unnaturally, as if the wearer had stalked and then retreated. In the loft, forensics cordoned off the visible horrors while admitting their limits. The cold had preserved flesh and blood in a macabre tableau, but also arrested decomposition in ways that blurred the time of death. Investigators lacked modern tools like latent print analysis and advanced blood chemistry to pin a timeline. A smear on the stair suggested someone had been dragged, contradicting the maid's insistence that each victim had been found where they fell. A missing pocket watch hinted at theft or concealment. A foreign brand cigarette butt in the snow suggested an outsider or a cultivated lie. A wrench with a greasy smear that matched no household hand implicated someone with hidden repair skills. Confessions arrived and collapsed under scrutiny. A distraught man offered a garbled tale of revenge and then recanted. A dismissed farmhand accused the returned soldier, who produced witnesses who contradicted one another, and then fell silent. Officials admitted contamination had been severe. Curious townsmen trampled the outskirts, moved a door, and shoved aside a bloody sheet in crude curiosity, erasing microscopic truth. With no serology, no modern hair microscopy, and limited fingerprint work, every plausible suspect remained both plausible and effectively exonerated by doubt. The consequence was brutal clarity. Motive and opportunity had to be reconstructed from behavior, habit, and intimate knowledge. Who had learned the family's rhythms well enough to feed cattle at night and slip into the loft? Who could wield violence with the precise, savage economy the scene implied? Accusations spread like contagion. Neighbors quietly formed search parties, tempers sharpened, and an appetite for immediate, bloody resolution built toward the inevitable, eruptive confrontation waiting on the ridge. The breakdown of tidy explanations comes down to a cold arithmetic of evidence and error. One wood-soled trail that stops at the barn suggests a single prowler, but a mosaic of overlapping scuffs. a child's tread cutting through boot prints, and multiple eyewitness reports, 2 shadows, a bobbing lantern, conflicting silhouettes, push back toward multiple attackers or someone staging multiplicity. Inside the house, the scene points to someone with intimate knowledge. Animals fed, chores completed, an attic used as a vantage point. These are not the clumsy traces of a random drifter. Yet the killings themselves show a savage precision, concentrated blunt force blows, and the careful placement of victims that feel practiced rather than chaotic. Procedural failures only deepen the ambiguity. Trampled perimeters, handled bodies, missing blood chemistry and fingerprints, and contaminated testimony erase the microscopic clues that might have decided between a lone wolf and conspirators. Putting motive against means, the most plausible reading is this: someone from within the valley, an embittered insider or a dismissed worker who had shadowed the family, used routine knowledge to enter and keep watch, possibly helped by an accomplice or by deliberate staging to confuse observers. That intruder turned stalking into slaughter with methodical cruelty, hid or removed a pocket watch to obscure the timeline, and vanished along the same dark track that once led them in. Still, wide gaps remain. The attacker's identities, the exact number involved, and the final route are unresolved. That uncertainty is what sustains the story's dread and carries us into the aftermath. From its unresolved climax, the Hinterkaifeck murders cast a grotesque shadow that still warps memory and method. The farm's macabre tableau galvanized a new forensic awareness. Investigators and scholars recoiled at procedural failures and turned the case into a brutal lesson in preserving scenes, tracking footprints, and protecting microscopic traces wiped away by curiosity. In the popular imagination, Hinterkaifeck became a spectral parable of rural vulnerability. Podcasts, documentaries, and novels have mined its savage details, trading on the mystery to conjure nightmares and puzzles. Ethically, the case demands that we refuse sensational erasure. Naming the 6 victims, honoring their final terror, and resisting conspiratorial simplifications is the minimum duty we owe the dead. Practically, contaminated and mishandled evidence accelerated a shift toward more rigorous policing, including strict room-to-room scene control. The persistent uncertainty, who, how, why, remains a corrosive force that haunts historians and fuels public obsession. Hinterkaifeck endures as a raw, unanswered wound. How do we live with crimes that refuse closure?